I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the middle of the ballroom, my cheek burning, and counted to 3. My sister's engagement party. 200 guests. Champagne in crystal flutes. And my mother's hand had just connected with my face hard enough to make the string quartet stop playing. The room went completely silent. I picked up my clutch from the table, smoothed my dress, and walked out without saying a single word. That night, I made 4 phone calls. By the following Monday morning, my mother's platinum card was declined at the spa. My sister's lease renewal was rejected. My brother-in-law's business line of credit was frozen, and the Range Rover my mother drove, the one registered in my name, had a tow truck scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. They thought I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who would always show up and clean up the mess and never ask for anything in return. They were right about all of that. For a very long time, they were absolutely right. My name is Nora. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior contracts attorney at a commercial real estate firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have a 1-bedroom apartment I love, a car I own outright, and a savings account that would make most people my age genuinely uncomfortable with envy. I also have a mother who introduced me to her friends at that engagement party as my daughter who's still figuring things out, and a younger sister named Chloe who nodded along and laughed. I had been quietly paying for most of their lives for 4 years. Let me explain how that started, because it didn't happen all at once. It never does with families like mine. My father passed away when I was 26. He left behind a modest life insurance policy, a mortgage that was 3 months behind, and a family that had absolutely no idea how to function without someone holding everything together. I was the oldest. I stepped in. That's what you do. At least, that's what I told myself. I covered the mortgage for 6 months while my mother adjusted. I paid off a credit card balance my sister had run up planning a vacation she couldn't afford. I co-signed my brother-in-law Marcus's small business loan when the bank wouldn't approve him on his own income. "Just a signature," he said. "Just to get things started. I'll pay you back within the year." That was 4 years ago. What I didn't fully understand at the time, what I couldn't see because I was grieving and trying to be strong and needed to feel useful, was that every single thing I did became the new normal, the baseline, the floor below which things simply were not allowed to fall, because I was there to catch them. My mother stopped looking at her bank balance because she knew if anything went wrong, I would handle it. Chloe and Marcus bought a house they could not afford on his income alone, and when the payments stretched them thin, Marcus came to me quietly with a number, and a timeline and a look on his face that told me he already knew I would say yes. I did say yes. I always said yes. No one was cruel about it. That's the part that made it so easy to miss. Nobody demanded anything. Nobody threatened. They just assumed. They assumed with the complete and comfortable confidence of people who have never been told no, who have no reason to expect anything different, because nothing different had ever happened. I paid the equivalent of a second mortgage every single month between my mother's expenses, the loan payments, and the various smaller things that came up constantly. I drove a 4-year-old Honda because it made more financial sense. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I worked 60-hour weeks and came home to a quiet apartment and told myself this was temporary. This was family. This was what love looked like in practice. What I didn't tell myself because I wasn't ready to was that not one of them had ever asked how I was doing and meant it. Not once in 4 years had my mother called to check on me, rather than to tell me about something she needed. Not once had Chloe said thank you in a way that acknowledged what it cost me. Marcus sent me a gift card for my birthday one year, $30 to a coffee chain, for the woman whose signature had made his entire business possible. I noticed all of it. I filed it away. I kept showing up. The engagement party was for Chloe and Marcus's renewal of vows. 5 years married, and they wanted a celebration. My mother decided it should be an event, a real event, at the Aldrich Club, which is the kind of venue in Charlotte that charges you for the air you breathe. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon and described the venue, the menu, the florist, the photographer, and the jazz quartet, and then at the end, almost as an afterthought, mentioned what it would cost. I was quiet for a moment. "Mom," I said, "that's a significant amount of money." "Nora." Her voice dropped into that particular register she used when she wanted me to understand that I was being difficult. Your sister only gets to celebrate her marriage once. She already got married once. That's what an anniversary is. I don't know why you always have to make everything harder than it needs to be. I agreed to cover it. I told myself it was the last time. I had told myself that before. I want to be fair in how I describe my mother, because the truth is complicated. She is not a cruel woman in the way that word usually implies. She doesn't yell. She doesn't belittle in obvious ways. She is charming and social and genuinely beloved by her friends and neighbors. She is also the kind of woman who has spent her entire life arranging things so that other people absorb the difficulty while she absorbs the comfort, and she does it so naturally and so completely that I'm not sure she's ever once recognized it as a pattern. What she is, I understand now, is someone who decides what she needs and then finds the person most likely to provide it and applies pressure so gently and consistently that the person barely notices they've been moved. I had been that person my entire adult life. The night of the party, I arrived on time. I was wearing a dress I'd had for 2 years, perfectly appropriate, nothing special. I hadn't bought anything new because I'd spent the prior 2 weeks finalizing vendor payments for the event and my budget was tight that month. My mother looked at me the moment I walked in, and her expression flickered with something I recognized but had learned to ignore. She was standing with a group of her friends near the entrance, women I'd known since childhood, well-dressed and well-perfumed, and exactly the kind of audience my mother performed best for. "Nora," she said. The warmth in her voice was genuine in the way. Stage lighting is genuine, designed to illuminate, not to reveal. "Everyone, this is my older daughter. She's still figuring out her path. You know how it is with some kids, they take a little longer." I smiled. I had been smiling at variations of this introduction for years. One of the women, I think her name was Patricia, tilted her head with practiced sympathy. "That's so hard. But you have Chloe. She's just radiant, isn't she?" "Marcus is wonderful. He really is," my mother agreed. I excused myself and went to find a drink. About an hour into the evening, Chloe found me near the dessert table and told me I looked tired. She said it the way people say things when they're not complimenting you but want you to feel like they are. "Long week," I said. "You should really try to enjoy yourself," she said. "Mom worked so hard on this." I looked at my sister and thought about all the things I could say. I thought about the invoice from the florist I had paid 48 hours ago. I thought about the venue deposit, the caterer's final balance, the photographer's fee. I thought about 4 years of quiet, invisible labor that had made every comfortable moment of her life possible. I thought about all of that, and I smiled, and I said, "You're right. It's a beautiful party." She patted my arm and went back to her husband. The moment happened about 90 minutes in. I had been introduced a second time to a group of guests my mother wanted to impress: a city council member and his wife, 2 women who sat on the board of a local charitable foundation. My mother was in the middle of explaining that Chloe and Marcus had built something really special together, describing Marcus's business, his vision, his ambition. One of the foundation women asked how the business was financed. Marcus smiled and said he'd had some support early on, but was really standing on his own now. I must have made a sound. I don't know what sound it was. Something small, something involuntary. My mother looked at me. "Nora," she said, very quietly, in a voice the others could still hear. "Is something funny?" "No," I said. "Nothing's funny. Because that expression on your face suggests you find something amusing, and I'd really like to know what it is, since you're standing in the middle of a party I organized for your sister." That was the thing about my mother. She always found a way to make you the problem before you'd even become one. "I was just thinking," I said, still calm, still composed, "that Marcus should mention the cosigner on that original business loan. It's a significant detail." The silence that followed lasted approximately 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, I watched Marcus's face go carefully blank, and my mother's face go the particular color it went when she felt publicly cornered. Then her hand came up and it connected with my face and the music stopped. I stood there, cheek burning, 200 people watching. "Don't you dare embarrass this family," she said. Her voice was very controlled. That was almost the worst part. I picked up my clutch. I smoothed my dress. I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes. I wasn't crying. I was thinking with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when something you've been avoiding finally becomes completely undeniable. I thought about 4 years. I thought about the mortgage and the credit card and the loan and the lease and the venue and the florist and the photographer and the $30 coffee gift card. I thought about still figuring out her path. And you should try to enjoy yourself and don't you dare embarrass this family. Then I took out my phone and I started making calls. My attorney answers her cell even on weekends, which is one of the reasons I pay her retainer without complaint. I told her what I needed. She asked me twice if I was certain. I said yes both times. She said she'd have documentation ready by Monday morning. The Range Rover registered in my name. I called the financing company that night and initiated a voluntary repossession. The car was still in the venue's parking lot. They said they could have someone there within 24 hours. I said that would be fine. The co-signer agreement on Marcus's business loan had a clause I had reviewed very carefully when I signed it and had thought about many times since. I was not a passive co-signer. I held what amounted to a secured interest in the business assets as collateral for my exposure. My attorney had insisted on that language. I had agreed somewhat reluctantly at the time, thinking I would never need it. I called her back after the tow truck call and told her to start the process. My mother's platinum card, the one attached to an account I funded, I suspended online before I went to sleep that night. I set an automatic transfer to stop. The account would run to zero on its own within about 3 weeks if she spent at her usual rate. I did not close it dramatically. I simply stopped feeding it. The lease. This one was the quietest and in some ways the most significant. Chloe and Marcus's lease on their home had a co-applicant listed me because their combined income at the time of application had not met the landlord's requirements. I had agreed to be listed as a financial guarantor. Their lease was up for renewal in 6 weeks. I sent a certified letter to the property management company, informing them that I would not be renewing my guarantor status for the next term. Cordial, professional, and entirely within my rights. I slept better that night than I had in years. I went to work Monday morning and didn't tell anyone what had happened. I answered emails, reviewed 2 contracts, attended a department meeting, ate lunch at my desk. In the early afternoon, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Then Chloe called. Then Marcus called from a number I almost didn't recognize. I let them all go. My mother's voicemail was controlled but strained. She said she wanted to talk. She said she hoped I wasn't being dramatic. She said she had just tried to use her card at a restaurant and there seemed to be an issue, and could I look into it? Chloe's voicemail started warm and got confused. She said she and Marcus had gotten a letter about the lease and she didn't understand it and was everything okay and could I call her back? Marcus didn't leave a voicemail. He called again 2 hours later from the same number, and I answered it this time. Nora. His voice was doing something I hadn't heard from him before. Something careful and thin. I think we need to talk. Okay, I said. Talk. A pause. There's been some kind of issue with the account attached to the business. Some kind of flag. My accountant is saying it looks like the collateral position has been activated, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Nora. Marcus, you stood in front of a city council member and a charitable foundation board and told them you built your business on your own. I was standing right there. He was quiet. You've had 4 years to say thank you. 4 years to acknowledge, even privately, what my signature made possible. Instead, you sent me a $30 gift card and told a room full of people you did it yourself. I just meant. I know what you meant. I also know what you said. And I know what my co-signer agreement says, which is that I have the right to call my position if I determine there's material risk to my interest. I've made that determination. This will destroy the business. Then you should have built it differently. I ended the call. I sat for a moment at my desk, looking out the window at the Charlotte skyline, and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My mother came to my apartment the following Thursday. I don't know how she got past the front door attendant. She has a particular way with building staff, but she knocked on my door at 6:45 in the evening, and I let her in because I wasn't afraid of the conversation anymore. She sat on my couch and looked around my apartment the way she always did, taking in the absence of certain things, the presence of others. She had never complimented anything about how I lived. I noticed that, standing in my own kitchen, and wondered how I had managed not to notice it for 32 years. "Nora," she said, "what you're doing is going to hurt this family very badly." "The family has been hurting me for a long time," I said. "I've just been doing it quietly." She looked at me the way she looked at things she didn't understand, which I had always interpreted as disappointment but now recognized as something else, genuine disorientation. She had no framework for this. I had never pushed back. I had never set a condition. I had never once in 4 years said, "This is what this costs me, and I'm not willing to pay it anymore." "I want to understand why you would do this now," she said. "Over a party." "It's not about the party," I said. "It's about standing in front of people you wanted to impress, and introducing me as someone who hasn't figured out her life, and then asking me to pay for the event where you said it." She opened her mouth. "It's about 4 years of being the person everyone calls when something needs to be handled and no one calls when nothing is wrong. It's about co-signing a loan and being told in a room full of people that it never happened. And it's about the fact that when I made a sound, one involuntary sound, the response was a slap in the face in front of 200 people. The room was very quiet. I raised you to be strong," she said finally. "You raised me to be available," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." She left after about 20 minutes. She didn't apologize. I don't think she was capable of it in the way I would have needed. What she did, right before she stood up, was look at me for a long moment with something in her eyes that was not quite recognition but was adjacent to it. Something that said she was beginning to understand that the architecture of the last 4 years had not been built the way she thought. Chloe came 2 weeks later, without Marcus. That surprised me. She sat in the same spot on the couch, and she did not open with an argument. She said, "I didn't know how much you were paying." I looked at her. I mean, I knew some of it, the early stuff, but I didn't know it was still. She stopped. Tried again. "Marcus handled the finances. I just knew things were okay. Things were okay, because I was making them okay." She looked at her hands. "I'm sorry I said you looked tired at the party. It was such a small thing. Such a specific, small, insufficient thing. And yet something about its specificity made it feel more real than a large sweeping apology would have." "That's not the part that needed the apology," I said. "I know." She looked up. "I'm sorry for all of it. I'm sorry that Mom hit you and I didn't say anything. I was shocked and then it was over, and I didn't know what to do, and I let you walk out." Her voice broke slightly on the last part. "I should have walked out with you. I didn't say it was okay. It wasn't okay." But I handed her a glass of water and I sat down across from her and we talked for 2 hours. Really talked, in a way we hadn't since we were teenagers. About our father. About how things had shifted when he died. About how I had stepped into a role and none of us had ever stopped to ask whether I wanted to be in it. I didn't undo any of it for her. The lease, the business implications, the accounts. I wasn't in a position to, and more honestly, I wasn't willing to. But I left a door open for my sister, specifically narrow, clearly framed, with conditions I stated plainly. She listened to all of them. She didn't argue with any of them. Marcus sold part of the business to a partner to cover what he owed. It wasn't catastrophic. He had actually built something real over 4 years, with real assets and real clients, but it was a significant restructuring, and the version that emerged was smaller than what he'd had. He never called me again. I don't expect he will. My mother took about 6 weeks to fully understand that the accounts were not going to be restored. During that period, she tried several things. A long email written in the tone of someone who had been deeply wronged, a second visit to my building that the front desk turned away at my prior instruction, a mutual friend she clearly briefed and sent my way. The mutual friend called me, started to say something, and then stopped and said, "I don't actually want to be in the middle of this." I said I appreciated that. We had coffee. She never brought it up again. My mother, to her credit, eventually landed somewhere I hadn't expected. She got a part-time job at a non-profit she'd been volunteering at for years. She rented out the larger house and moved into something she could actually afford on her own income and Social Security. She called me once, about 3 months after everything, and the call was 15 minutes long, and she asked me about work, and I asked her about the new apartment, and neither of us referred to anything that had happened directly. It was not warmth, but it was something like honesty. Finally, two people talking without one of them managing the other. I didn't know yet whether that was the beginning of something different or just a quieter version of the same distance. I decided I was willing to find out. I took a vacation. A real one, 12 days in Portugal with a friend from law school, no laptop, no family group chats, no management of anything that wasn't my own enjoyment. I ate dinner at 10 at night and walked along the water in the morning and sat in small cafes and read novels and thought about very little of consequence. On the last night, sitting outside with a glass of wine and the particular kind of tiredness that comes from having actually rested, I thought about who I had been 4 years ago, 28 years old and freshly grieving, and so desperate to be useful that I had handed over the thing I needed most, the right to be known as something other than the person who fixes things. I thought about my sister saying I should have walked out with you. I thought about all the ways love gets distorted when it passes through obligation for too long without being named. I finished my wine. The water was dark and very still. Somewhere across the harbor, lights were coming on in clusters. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because stories like this are supposed to end with triumph, with the clean satisfaction of accounts settled and wrongs reversed and the protagonists standing in the glow of their own vindication. What I felt was quieter than that, more like setting down something I had been carrying for so long that I'd stopped noticing the weight. What I had lost was a version of my family that had never fully existed except in what I was willing to provide. What I had gained was the only thing that had ever actually been mine. My own life, returned to me, at 32, finally and completely. I left a good tip for the waiter. I walked back to the hotel. I slept without my phone on. In the morning, I booked myself a seat on the early flight home.